New Prime Minister Boris Johnson says Britain will leave the EU on October 31st. Nigeria's President Buhari submits a cabinet list to the upper house for approval. And we take a look at how climate change is impacting Tunisia's environment and economy. Well, hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. And with me is Rama Nyang with a preview of your business news.
That's right, Lindy. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. The International Monetary Fund has cut growth forecasts for South Africa. An Ethiopia state-owned telecommunications firm has reported $1.25 billion in revenue. We'll have the details and the numbers and plenty more in the course of the hour. For now, though, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Lindy.
Thanks, Rama. Well, let's start the hour in the United Kingdom, where new Prime Minister Boris Johnson has vowed to deliver Brexit. Johnson is, in fact, the first Brexit supporter since the UK voted to leave the European Union by a 52% margin to actually lead the government. In his first address as Prime Minister, and that was delivered in Downing Street, Johnson said he's going to deliver what will be a new deal and a better deal with the European Union.
The doubters, the doomsters, the gloomsters, they are going to get it wrong again. The people who bet against Britain are going to lose their shirts because we're going to restore trust in our democracy. And we're going to fulfill the repeated promises of Parliament to the people and come out of the EU on October the 31st. No ifs or buts. And we will do a new deal, a better deal that will maximise the opportunities of Brexit while allowing us to develop a new and exciting partnership with the rest of Europe based on free trade and mutual support. I have every confidence that in 99 days' time we will have cracked it. But you know what? We aren't going to wait 99 days because the British people have had enough of waiting. The time has come to act, to take decisions, to give strong leadership and to change this country for the better.
Well, an eventful day in the UK. Let's bring you the very latest now from London. We're joined by CGTN's Jamie Owen. He's been following all these developments for us. Jamie, of course, Boris Johnson now officially begins his term as British Prime Minister with the focus on Brexit. But his first order of business is to set up his cabinet. Just talk us through the latest news coming from London's corridors of power.
Yeah, well, actually, the fairest way to describe it is this cabinet reshuffle looks like night of the long knives. I'm joined now by the political analyst Joe Twynham, who's been watching events for us. We expected this to be a rather gentle affair, but I mean, he's chainsawing everybody in his way. This is a wholesale clear out of the British cabinet.
That's right. In a sense, reshuffle is not a strong enough word. Back in 1962, when Harold Macmillan sacked 7 of his cabinet, it was an absolute outcry. And yet now we have a situation where 10, and indeed 11 if you count Theresa May, the previous cabinet, will be leaving to be replaced by new people who appear, at least if the rumours are to be believed, they're being replaced by people who were supporters of Boris Johnson's from the beginning, but also, crucially, supporters of his position on Brexit. And so those hoping for a soft Brexit or those supporting Remain may very well be disappointed that the conciliatory position that some had suggested Boris Johnson might adopt seems to have been left very much by the wayside.
So what can we read from this? We were talking yesterday about this being an opportunity to bring together this divided party and to keep in cabinet those ministers who voted Remain, who didn't vote for Boris Johnson, because that would be a way of uniting the divided Conservative Party. It doesn't look like that's going to happen.
Well, what it looks like to me is that Brexit is all important, and we saw that during the campaign. We saw that really over the last 3 years since the referendum result, and now we see it represented in the cabinet. It appears to me that Boris Johnson is choosing people who he believes will support him at every stage, and so in a sense he's adopting a more presidential style of prime ministership compared to Theresa May. Theresa May started off looking to keep a lot of people happy. trying to please all of the people all of the time. Boris Johnson is not trying to please all of the people. He is simply trying to get his version of Brexit through in the most effective and efficient manner possible.
The danger of this, of course, is that those disaffected people are returning to the backbenches, and that could store up trouble, couldn't it?
It's an enormous risk. Once a lot of these former cabinet ministers are released from what we call ministerial cabinet responsibility, they're no longer bound to, in effect, behave themselves. And not only can they speak out against the government, not only can they speak out against Boris Johnson and his plans for Brexit, but crucially, they can vote against the government at will. And that could be crucially important when it comes to getting a deal, any deal, through Parliament, because the government in this country still only has a very, very small working majority, and even that is as a result of an agreement with another party from Northern Ireland. And so every single vote counts, and having 10, 11 potentially disaffected politicians playing havoc on the backbenches is something that Boris Johnson will not want, but at the same time he clearly thinks that that is less of a problem than having people fighting against his plans for Brexit with inside cabinet.
Now, just explain to us the significance of the numbers in that building behind us, because the world's media is here reporting on this huge story, a new face in Downing Street, a new Prime Minister. Power ultimately, and change ultimately, rests not with the Prime Minister, but with the House of Commons, and the sums remain the same, don't they?
That's right. When you look at what's happened since Boris Johnson has been elected, yes, we now have new cabinet ministers, or will have new cabinet ministers in place. But crucially, when it comes to Brexit, two things, at least for now, are not changing. The first is the parliamentary arithmetic. And as mentioned, Boris Johnson suffers greatly from the fact that he only has a wafer-thin majority. And secondly, the situation in Brussels, the negotiations with the European Union appear to, at least for now, not be changing. So what Boris Johnson must ask himself over really the next few weeks and months is, what is the greater risk? Running an election without having secured Brexit, or securing Brexit without having secured an election?
Joe, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Lindy, much more to talk about in the coming hours here on CGTN. I hope you'll join us later. For the moment, back to you.
Well, thank you so much. That's Jamie Owen there for us in London. Of course, the question is, will this be the cabinet that delivers that elusive Brexit deal? Well, we will keep our eyes on developments there. Let's turn now to news from the DRC. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, at least 12 people have been killed in an attack by suspected allied defense forces. According to authorities, the rebels first killed 9 people in Erengeti town and 3 more in Ocha. The region has been grappling with insecurity as Ebola continues to spread amid rising militia activities. Beni Administrator Kasereka Donat told the media that despite a heavy presence of troops, local communities are living in fear of attacks. Well, CGTN's Chris Ochomringa has been keeping an eye on developments from Kinshasa. He joins us now live. Chris, what is the latest on these attacks in Erengeti and Ocha in that locality of Beni?
Well, the DRC army says that it's pursuing the militia group that carried out this attack. They believe it was the handiwork of the Allied Democratic Forces, an Islamist militia group that originally came from Uganda. They haven't given us any further details about any arrests or casualties, but I spoke to an MP from Beni, and he was saying the people there are very worried and very disappointed with the Congolese army for failing to protect them. They're saying the ADF has carried out so many attacks, it has kidnapped and killed people and burnt people's houses as well. And this is happening as the Congolese army and UN peacekeepers have a very heavy presence in that area. So people are wondering what they're doing when these people are killing them. So there's a feeling of frustration and disappointment among the populace there.
And we know, of course, that this particular region has been the epicenter of the Ebola epidemic. Is there a sense that government resources are overstretched in this particular region?
Well, that's right. I mean, this is happening in an area that's a conflict zone. Ebola has been killing more than 1,700 people have died of Ebola in that area. So there's a lot of frustration both from health workers and the locals. The authorities are saying look, we have poured a lot of money to try and stop this disease from spreading, but they can't do it when these attacks are happening. And so the UN last month appointed an Ebola coordinator called Mr. David Gressley, who's supposed to coordinate the security response. He's working very closely with the local people because this isn't a conventional battle. These rebels are not people who are found in a particular location. Some of them live within the community. They gather all the intelligence and go and tell their colleagues, and then when they come back and attack people, you know, it's very hard for the authorities to crack down on this atrocities by these people. So there is a sense of frustration among the people that there's a lot of money being put to tackle Ebola, but then it's not working because of this attacks by militant groups.
A very challenging situation indeed. Chris Ochambringa joining us there live from Kinshasa. All right, let's turn to news now coming out of Somalia. A suicide bomb attack on the local government headquarters has injured the mayor of Mogadishu and several other Somali officials. According to reports, ambulances rushed to the scene after the blast, but journalists were forbidden from going into the attack sites. Government authorities, though, have not disclosed the official details on the number of casualties. We do know that no one has claimed responsibility for the attack, but it does bear the hallmarks of Al-Qaeda-linked Islamist group Al-Shabaab. The insurgency wants to topple the UN-backed government. Let's bring you the very latest on this story. CGTN's Abdulaziz Billo joins us on the line from Mogadishu. Abdulaziz, has there now been any official word from government with regards to the casualties from this latest suicide bomb attack?
Well, Lindy, authorities have launched immediate investigation into the attack that happened inside the local government headquarters here in Mogadishu. But a key number of senior local government officials have been killed in that suicide attack that happened at the local government offices. Now, among those injured include the mayor, Omar Osman. Is in critical condition according to authorities here, but medics are trying as much as possible to save him, including many more who were injured in the attack. But also 3 district commissioners have also been confirmed dead in that suicide attack. Now, whatever happened exactly, Lindy, is Al-Shabaab, the militant group here in Somalia, just a minute ago claimed responsibility for the attack, claiming that it wanted to target the United Nations envoy to Somalia, James Swan, who had met the Mogadishu Mayor Omar Osman Yerito a few hours before the attack took place. So they're saying that the target was the top UN chief, but the latest information coming from the scene of the blast is at least 7 people, most of them senior local government officials, have succumbed to the suicide blast. Now, exactly the information about the attack remains to be confirmed, but what authorities here are trying to say is that apart from the investigation that is being launched, there are reports that it was a female suicide bomber who detonated herself inside a security gathering by the Mogadishu mayor as well as security officials here in Mogadishu. That information is yet to be verified by the police, but investigation is still ongoing. The area has been secured. Militant group Al-Shabaab has taken credit. It's a sad day here in Mogadishu that recently also witnessed a deadly attack that killed 17 people at a security checkpoint not far from the mayor's office.
Oh, absolutely a sad day indeed. Thank you so much, Abdulaziz Billo, with that update from Mogadishu. And as he says, 7 people have succumbed to their injuries following that attack, and Al-Shabaab has officially claimed responsibility for it. Now let's turn to news from Nigeria. President Muhammadu Buhari has submitted his list of cabinet members to the upper house of parliament for ratification. The leader of Africa's most populous nation will be looking to fulfill his promises of tackling insecurity, fixing the economy and fighting corruption over his next 4-year term. Buhari took the oath of office 8 weeks ago from the nation's capital of Abuja. Here's CGTN's Phil Ihaza with more.
Mr. Buhari's list contains 43 cabinet members, including 12 returnees, such as the Minister of Power, Works and Housing, Babatunde Fashola, and the Minister of Information, Culture and Tourism, Lai Mohammed. 31 others will be serving for the first time as ministers under the Buhari administration. Some analysts, though, say more technocrats rather than politicians should have been given a task to steer the country forward.
Personally, I would have preferred to see a kind of a total change of the type of people we're bringing on board to be members of the Federal Executive Council or ministers. Virtually all, if not all, are all politicians. So it means that they were nominated based on political patronage. So one would have expected the president to actually bring on board a lot of technocrats, people who have expertise, technical know-how on how to move our economy forward at this critical stage. And it will also will have assuaged some fears of Nigerians that the future is not bleak.
Despite President Buhari's campaign promises to include more females and young people in his second administration, only 7 women made it to the list and no youth. 16% of the ministerial list are women, the same percentage in the first tenure of Mr. President, and a far cry from the previous administration of former President Goodluck Jonathan, where women numbered 30%.
Out of the 43 names on that ministerial list, I took time last night to go through their profiles, and I discovered none of them, none. I stand to be corrected. None of them is below age 40. So which means none of them can be called a youth as far as the indices are concerned, or the parameters we use in determining who is a youth. Now, that's the minus for the list. Then women, we have 7 on the list out of 43. That is also a far cry from the 35% affirmative plan.
Nigeria is currently dealing with high levels of insecurity, corruption and poverty. The World Poverty Clock reports that the country is home to the highest number of extremely poor people in the world. Although Mr. Buhari promised to tackle these issues since assuming office in 2015, critics say not much progress was made. However, many are hopeful that President Buhari will improve the lives of nearly 200 million citizens with the wits and prowess of his newly appointed cabinet members, as well as ensure the numerous challenges facing the nation are tackled within his second and final tenure. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. It's all about climate change. First, we'll look at the impact it's having on Tunisia's environment and economy. And the habitat loss cited as threats to African mammal species.
For a look at some economic data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives. News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice. Well, let's take a look at the impact climate change is having on the continent. We start in Tunisia, where scientists, fishermen and tourism professionals say that climate change is having a negative impact on the environment as well as the economy. Rising sea levels have reduced beaches and limited revenue in the North African nation. CGTN's Ednan Chouachi has the details.
About 8 million Tunisians live along the 1,148 kilometers of coast. Experts believe that climate change is threatening their habitat and livelihoods. Professor Jalal Azzin is the chairholder of UNESCO Chair on Science, Technology and Innovation Policy. He is among the first scientists who have raised the alarm.
I must insist that we are really in a critical situation, and that's why I'm saying we need to really act immediately and to mitigate climate change and consequently make sure that the future generation would be left with a sustainable planet.
Professor Zine calls for a global effort to face the challenge of climate change and its impact on the environment in Tunisia and worldwide.
This requires a global governance system that will hopefully orchestrate whatever will be done locally on the level of countries and globally on the level of the planet to be able to really reverse the situation. Even though I must insist that we are really in a critical situation.
Experts also assert that the alarming climate change has a negative impact on the fishermen's activities on the coastline. People here in the capital city Tunis and in many coastal cities say they live under permanent threat. La Goulette is a well-known fishing community in the north of the capital city Tunis. Many fishermen are convinced that climate change has reduced their revenues.
I'm not a scientist, but I can understand the impact of climate change on my activity. I've been fishing for 40 years in the same area. The beaches are disappearing and there is less fish in the sea.
Tourism professionals argue that beaches in Tunisia are disappearing because of rising sea levels and erosion.
We feel the threat of climate change. Tourism is the pillar of our economy. The disappearance of beaches means less revenues for hotels and the loss of thousands of jobs on the coastline.
Tunisian and foreign scientists say that rising sea levels due to climate change will put dozens of World Heritage sites in the Mediterranean basin, including Carthage, Mehdia and other sites, at increased risk of flooding and erosion. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
And to South Africa now, where habitat loss and climate change continue to push the African bird and mammal species toward the brink of extinction. Biodiversity on the continent is also under extreme pressure. This emerged at the Eastern and Southern African Conservation Forum, which is currently underway in Johannesburg. CGTN's Zulisa Jamela has more.
The African continent is extraordinarily rich in biodiversity and ecosystems. The continent is also endowed with vast animal species. But as a result of varying reasons, including human destruction, these are under threat. The African continent is experiencing a dramatic loss of biodiversity. It is expected that in a couple of decades, due to climate change alone, the continent will lose half of the bird and mammal species. In this gathering of environmental experts and ministers from the continent, it has emerged that some animals are now closer to extinction as a result of, amongst other things, poaching, while deforestation and hunting for bushmeat also pose a greater threat.
While livelihoods are improving across the region, too often much of this progress has come at the expense of our natural world. The changes in our climate, global habitat loss, and an extinction rate 1,000 times above normal are warning signs we can no longer ignore.
A global biodiversity assessment report produced by the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystems Services has sent shocking waves as it notes that as many as 1 million species could become
overexploitation of species, climate change, pollution, and spread of invasive species. These drivers are having an unprecedented impact on biodiversity and ecosystems.
According to the United Nations, loss of wildlife and habitats could harm food sources and industry and even exacerbate climate change.
This forum, ladies and gentlemen, presents an unparalleled opportunity to chart a path that balances economic growth with conservation of ESARO's natural capital through strategic choices and investments driven by the best available knowledge and long-term thinking.
This forum also highlighted the need for the involvement of the youth in the environmental sector.
The future belongs to the youth because the current generation right now who are old most probably won't live to see for example, the year 2050 and onwards. So it's up to the youth to conserve what we have, and that's why I encourage more youth-led conservation organizations.
The forum is expected to result in recommendations targeting regional and continental policy processes. Yodisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
The European Union has granted 800 million euros to the African Union Commission to support peace and security efforts across the continent. The grant will also be used for conflict prevention and hijab rights in Africa. CGTN's Gurum Chala has more.
The 800 million euros grant from the European Union is intended to be used for works of peace and security across the African continent. It will be instrumental as well to support works of conflict prevention to be strengthened in Africa through the formation of an effective conflict avoidance strategy in all sectors. Similarly, the African Union will use a part of the cash it has received from the European Union for continent-wide human rights-related works. The grant agreement was signed by Moussa Faki Mohamed, the chairperson of the African Union Commission, and Neven Mimika, the European Union Commissioner for International Cooperation and Development. The European Union has been the single largest supporter of the African Union peace and security initiatives for quite a long time. Since 2004, for instance, and through the African Peace Facility, the EU has provided 2.7 billion euros to support African solutions to African problems. The European Union is the major financier of the African Union peacekeeping mission in Somalia, AMISOM. Grumtara CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
In Uganda, opposition MP Robert Chagulanyi, also known as Bobby Wine, has officially announced that he will run for president in the 2021 election. The 37-year-old will challenge President Yoweri Museveni, who has been in power for 33 years. The singer is a fierce critic of Museveni and has been an MP for 2 years. He was charged with treason last year over the alleged stoning of the presidential convoy. He denied the charges and was freed on bail.
I am personally willing and ready to lead you in this struggle. It is useless for me to think I will give any contribution without you, ladies and gentlemen. So I want to reiterate my call to all of us to always remember that this country is bigger than all of us. It is bigger than any of us. Uganda was there before the coming of colonialism. Uganda was there after colonialism. Uganda was there before dictatorship. And yes, Uganda will be there after dictatorship.
To Cameroon now, where calm appears to have returned after security forces quelled a prison riot in a jail in the capital, Yaoundé. The inmates were protesting against overpopulation in the prison and demanding better food. According to witnesses, the rioters filmed their protest and posted it on Facebook. Prisoners ransacked the facility and set parts of it on fire. No deaths were recorded, but several inmates were injured, including former Prime Minister Inoni Ephraim and ex-Prime Minister Urbain Olengwena Awono, who were targeted by other prisoners. Meanwhile, Amnesty International has called on authorities to avoid excessive force and to conduct an investigation into the use of firearms and live ammunition during riots. And let's now go to Rama Nyang for your latest business news.
Thank you very much, Lindy. Here's what's coming up in business. The International Monetary Fund has cut growth forecast for South Africa. And Ethiopia's state-owned telecommunication firms is reporting $1.25 billion in revenue. There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN. See the difference.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads, where opportunity meets innovation, where profitable new markets collide with global trends. From the sound of an African bell on a stock market's floor to the shout of the trader in a bustling free market, it's colorful, vibrant, and exotic. CGTN stands at the gateway to Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. From Morocco to South Africa, we talk to the deal makers and actors who fuel its engines of growth. Only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. South Africa's economy has not grown by more than 2% a year since 2013. In fact, it's actually struggling to just gain momentum. Despite President Cyril Ramaphosa's efforts to implement policy reforms designed to boost growth and lure in more foreign investment, the country's economic outlook only seems to be getting dimmer. Here's CGTN's Uche Okoronkwo explaining.
The International Monetary Fund has slashed South Africa's growth forecast for 2019 and 2020, a signal that President Ramaphosa's reform agenda is moving slower than expected. The fund cut its GDP growth forecast to 0.7% for 2019 from 1.2% previously and 1.1% for 2020 from 1.5%, citing a larger than anticipated impact of strike activity, energy supply issues in mining, and weak agricultural production. The projections are well below Treasury's forecast of 1.5% growth for 2019 and slightly above the Reserve Bank's projection of 0.6%. The road ahead only seems tougher, with further bailouts for state-owned enterprises expected to weigh in on the fiscus. That means the risk of losing its remaining investment-grade rating from Moody's, the only major ratings company that still classifies South Africa as investment-grade, is now more likely. Especially after Finance Minister Tito Mboweni said government may have to increase borrowing for power utility Eskom this year. Mboweni says the government's 2023-2024 forecast of a debt-to-GDP ratio of just more than 60% will probably prove optimistic, as it was based on growth rates that were unlikely to be achieved. Moody's is already projecting that the ratio could be 65%, with a risk of breaching the 70% mark, depending on the level of support needed by SOEs. Analysts say that South Africa's ability to avoid ratings downgrades will depend on it formulating a well-coordinated rescue for its state-owned enterprises, but years of poor management and state capture, aggravated by weak economic growth, culminating in further fiscal slippage in the current fiscal year and beyond. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Over in Nigeria, the National Petroleum Corporation has secured a $3.15 billion deal in a bid to boost crude output. Now, the funds will be used for the development of the oil mining license Block 13, which is located in the Niger Delta. The cash will ensure an increase in production as the country targets to raise its daily output to 3 million barrels of crude a day. The federal government is expected to earn about $10.2 billion a year in royalties and taxes from that project over the next 15 years. In January last year, NNPC's debt load reached $6.7 billion. In order to alleviate that debt, pay down some of it, the state oil firm reached a deal with international oil firms, essentially to take an equity share in some joint ventures. Zimbabwe has raised fuel prices for the second time in a week. The Southern African economy is currently battling fuel shortages, which are disrupting operations for many companies in the country. Its inflation is also at its highest level in a decade, and this has stoked fears that could be going back to an economically traumatic past. With the details, here's CGTN's Farai Mokutuya.
Year-on-year inflation rose to a 10-year high 175% in June. It's expected to soar higher as the local currency continues its downward slide and as other factors exert pressure on the economy.
Electricity prices must go up very dramatically, more than double, I would guess. Fuel prices will continue to go up. Food prices will rise in the second half of the year because of the drought, because of the need to import maize and wheat and so on. And there's also a catch-up in terms of wages and in terms of some service costs like state education, state hospitals and so on, which haven't been adjusted in line with inflation and which will have to be. On the forecast some of us make, we think inflation will reach perhaps 190, 200% by September and then fall in October, the last quarter.
The reduction is expected as government, fiscal and monetary reforms start to take effect, although the jury is still out on whether the boldest measure, reintroducing the Zimbabwe dollar, will work.
Well, again, in theory it should, but in practice, again, because of the lack of trust, because people have no confidence in the local currency, they've been burned twice. First in the early 2000s with hyperinflation, and now again. They've lost their savings, they've lost their pensions, they've lost their bank deposits, or the bank deposits are now worth a fraction of what they were 6 months or a year ago. And so there's no trust. Secondly, if you want to bring down inflation, it really doesn't make sense to exchange a strong currency, the US dollar, for a very weak currency, because that just adds to inflation.
No one knows what will happen after the third quarter.
So they'll just have to watch and wait, something many here have become used to. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Now, Ethiopia's state-owned telecommunications firm Ethio Telecom has generated $1.26 billion in revenue in its last fiscal year. That's a 7% rise compared to the year before. Earnings before interest, taxation, depreciation and amortization, $851 million. Several tariff discounts ranging from 40 to 50% were put in place to ensure a bit of affordability and to also boost service usage as well. That in turn did prompt an increase in data usage by 130%. Voice call volumes also went up by 19%. Various international telecommunications companies are eyeing a stake in the company in the wake of the approval by Ethiopian legislators to liberalize the sector. The firms include France's Orange, MTN South Africa, Britain's Vodafone and UAE's Etisalat and Zain of Kuwait. Still in East Africa, legislators in Kenya voted barely 24 hours ago to nationalize the country's flag carrier, Kenya Airways, ideally to save the carrier from mounting debts. Now, the government will draw up an implementation plan to return the airline to profitability. The report by Parliament's Transport Committee suggests setting up a holding company with 4 different subsidiaries within it in order to give those specific tax concessions and also to be exempted from paying excise duty. Back in 2017, KQ was forced to restructure $2 billion in debt following a failed expansion drive and a steep decline in air travel. 48.9% of Kenya Airways is currently owned by Kenyan taxpayers through their government. 7.8% is held by Air France KLM. The remainder belongs to local investors. Boeing has reported a massive loss in its second quarter results as costs continue to pile up for the aerospace giant. The loss reflects a $4.9 billion charge due to the grounding worldwide of its 737 MAX 8 and 9 planes after 2 fatal crashes killed 346 people. Boeing announced last week that, which is worth earnings last week rather, which is worth about $8.74 in earnings, and it added in its report that lower 737 deliveries, partially offset by high defense and services volume, were essentially on the books. The 737 MAX has been grounded since mid-March. It remains to be seen how long it will be until Boeing can fix the issues to the satisfaction of regulators. South Africa's halal meat sector is set to benefit from tariff-free exports agenda as being lobbied by the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Now, over the years, the Western Cape halal industry has seen growth beyond its geographical boundaries. It's now, in fact, a key player operating in multiple markets across the continent. CGTN's Travis Andrews has the details.
South Africa is known to produce quality red meat products, including the supply of premium cattle such as Angus and Wagyu, which fetch high prices in most markets. Locally produced halal red meat not only goes through traditional Islamic ceremonial procedures, but other hygiene procedures as well. And they, like other locally produced halal products, have shown demand in other African countries.
We certainly think that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is going to open up more opportunities, not only for halal exports, but for services exports from the Western Cape, as well as exports in other food and beverage types of products. We have had a few requests for meat products, even into West Africa.
In 2016, South Africa became a net exporter of red meat for the first time, contributing to global supply exports of 9.44 million tons, and some of that comes from Western Cape farms. Good Hope Meat Market is one of the Western Cape's largest supplier of halal meats into Africa, and they've been showing tremendous growth.
If you look at how demand has grown exponentially from these African markets, it's unbelievable. We constantly get inquiries from Mauritius, from Namibia, Zambia, a lot of predominantly with this Muslim population over there. But the African market, it's really opened up to us a lot in terms of demand for products.
They price competitive as well, which has made them competitive in Africa. But the supply of halal meat across borders into markets as far as East and West Africa requires significant logistics and partnerships. Inter-African trade has not come without its challenges, including restrictions affected by animal health issues such as foot and mouth disease. But South Africa does enjoy very strict animal hygiene protocols. And some markets have shown confidence in the supply of local meats and are showing demand for even greater supply lines.
If you're looking at markets like Mauritius, for example, the people are wanting agency, people wanting us to possibly establish a plant over there to service the market over there with our unique product range. So there's those type of dynamics that's happening right now.
For now, the certification process of halal red meat is respected throughout Africa, and many suppliers believe that's a great endorsement of locally produced products that are making their way into more and more stores across the continent. Ravs Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
And I'll leave you there for the time being. I'll be back at the top of the hour, though. We'll bring you more analysis on Boris Johnson, his policies in particular, especially now that he's the one in number 10 Downing Street. These all and that and plenty more coming your way at 1800 GMT. See you then. For now, though, back to Lindy.
Thanks very much, Rama. Well, let's take a short break, but here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Coming up, a South African collector makes a lifetime hobby out of collecting tribal artifacts.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Right, let's start with some news coming out of Sudan. The ruling Transitional Military Council says that a top military general and other officers have been arrested in connection with a foiled coup attempt. The military command has not issued details, but we are following up on the story and will bring you further details as we get them. For now, though, let's move on to some other news coming from South Africa. It's believed that investing in African art does not yield much returns, but a South African collector has made a lifetime hobby out of collecting tribal artifacts. Ronald Lowenthal has more than 1,000 relics and artworks from all across the continent. CGTN's Julie Shire has more.
African art collectors are a rare breed. But Ronald Lowenthal's fascination with tribal art has turned into an impressive collection. It all started while he was working in Asia in the 1970s.
I picked up that the art had quite a lot of African influences. Tribes all over the world tend to make the same objects and designs. And quite a few of my pieces are utility items. These are quite famous in Asia. These are called pig sticks. These are what in Papua New Guinea, they stick them in the ground, they wrap those leaves around it with a poison dart and they chase the pigs.
Lowenthal returned to Africa in 1984. His work in the mining industry took him to all corners of the continent and his hobby took on an African shape.
There was a guy from Congo, his father was a dealer and he came here, he wanted to get rid of them. He had them on. I bought about, I can't remember, 20, 30 pieces from him, and that was all those at the top and most of those at the bottom.
Ronald Lowenthal has been collecting this art for over 30 years. It is dramatic and unique, and these pieces come from mainly Central and West Africa. He now has more than 1,000 objects and artifacts, some of which could be more than 250 years old.
You'll never be able to really date the pieces unless you know exactly where they came from. If you know the village and you've spoken to the people, you can get a good idea, but generally you don't have that. Generally, you've just got an idea that that looks like an old piece or this is a young piece.
African cultural art does not generate much interest in the local or global market, and there's just a handful of collectors like Lowenthal who do it for passion and not for money. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Here's what's coming up in your sports news up next. Egypt winger Mahmoud Trezeguet is delighted with his move to Aston Villa.
Africa Live. Find your voice.